Sending the announcement to Slack. Opening up Twitch on my phone. All right. I'm still waiting for everyone to join. No sound? You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Oh, okay, someone's able to hear me. Oh, sorry, that's an ad on my phone from Twitch. Hear me on my own separate phone. Yeah, maybe disconnect and try again. All right, I'm going to switch over to my browser. Let me get Moodle pulled up here to where I want it. Let's see how many people have connected. 6 viewers. I see a few familiar names in there. Can everyone hear me? I know someone said they could, but there's a few other people in the room. Can you hear me now? I feel like I'm in an ad. How about now? Okay, I think I'm going to get started here. So this is the week that is probably most important to me. It's the reason I decided that I wanted to teach web design. I think it was in 2014 or 2015 when I began teaching at Mid, the web design course. And the reason I wanted to teach was so that I could show people how I use the web inspector to figure out how to build any aspect of a web page. That's how powerful the web inspector is. And I know many of you have already started the activity. I'm going to do parts of the activity and give you kind of a demonstration to fill in some of the gaps. But then after tonight, I really want you to play with the web inspector a lot. I want you to play so much with the web inspector that not only is it one challenge, but it is 2 challenges. There's a follow-up challenge where I want you to use the web inspector again, and in the perfect world, you'd be doing that at least a day or 2 apart so that you're really getting a lot of practice in with using the web inspector. I'm still hearing that someone can't hear me in the chat room. If anyone else is there, could you maybe put a comment in the chat room letting me know if you can still hear me? We got about 4 or 5 students. Okay, yeah, that's 2 people that can hear me. Maybe you need to, for the student that can't hear me, maybe you need to unplug your headphones or your speaker, or if you don't have anything plugged in, plug in headphones to see if that fixes it. I know on a laptop that I had plugged in a speaker and I had to like re-plug it in to get it to realize that it wasn't there anymore. Okay, so anyways, back to Web Inspector. So why am I so excited about it? Well, it allows me to look at any web page. And in the very first week, I had everyone, as part of that first chapter, go view the source of a web page to look at that code. And that was probably a lot of gobbledygook at the time. Now, I know that Chrome and Safari try to color code the code that you're looking at, which is a lot like what you see in Atom. but it's still an overwhelming amount of text. And when you add in the CSS aspect of it, you're probably writing CSS already that is affecting more than one thing on the page. And it's really hard for you in your mind to be able to figure out what CSS is affecting which parts of the page. And the Web Inspector really makes both aspects of this a lot easier, looking at the HTML and looking at the CSS. So I'd like to start by showing you the Web Inspector challenge. This was an in-class activity that I've done probably like 7 or 8 times now. For my class and for other people's classes, I actually guest taught in a couple of the web design classes just to show the Web Inspector. So this has been honed over a couple of years, and ever since we started, more new features have been added to the Web Inspectors, which has made them even more powerful, and the user interface has evolved. So when I show you something that's in part of the screen, next week when Chrome gets updated, it might get moved around. So hopefully I'll give you a lay of the land so that as Chrome and Firefox and Safari and even Edge continue to change, you'll be able to look for the pieces that will help you with picking apart a website. So this is an activity that you will be completing in Google Docs. You've completed a few of these. This is one where you will actually be able to type into it. Everyone in the class has the ability to type, so that means that you could overwrite somebody's work. I tried to leave enough blanks for you to get started. It looked like a few people had already ran out of room, so you can actually hit Tab on the last row to add a new line. I know that someone had started writing below the table, but you should be able to add as many rows as we need to put your website in here. So the first part of this challenge, Activity 1, is about launching the Web Inspector. And I want to dedicate some time to that because there's more than one way to do this. And you might find one of the ways fits your style a lot better. And there's actually different ways that I launch the Web Inspector depending on what I want to do. So I am going to use Chrome for this demonstration, which is kind of new for me. I typically do it in Safari. But to prove to you that I can use the Web Inspector in any browser, I'm going to use Chrome tonight. If you take Web Design 2, next semester we'll be using the Web Inspector in Firefox because it has a few design features that I think are worth exploring more in depth. But tonight I'm going to use Chrome. If you are at home, you can use Chrome to follow along. I'm going to be inspecting various parts of our website, and in fact I'm going to go to a site or a page specifically on our site that was really difficult to put together because it had a lot of CSS rules, and that's the current students page. I hope you've used this at least once in your life at Mid. There's some really colorful tiles on here. As you hover over, additional links appear. It's some pretty cool HTML and CSS. So I want to show you 3 ways to open up the Web Inspector. The first way is pretty traditional, and it's through the menus. In Chrome, there's this crazy 3-dot menu, at least on the Mac version. On the PC version, you might have like a file menu up at the top. I think the 3 dots way is probably the most platform agnostic way. If you click on that, there is a menu item called More Tools, and under there you're going to find the Developer Tools. If you click on that, this is going to open the Web Inspector, the first of the 3 ways. Now, this might look a little bit different on your computer if you've used Web Inspector already. In fact, mine might look different because I use Web Inspector like every day. So mine appeared at the bottom part of the window. I still have the web page up top, and I can scroll and click to browse. Everything is still functional up there, but there's this docked interface which shows the code, and it has several tabs along the top to show different aspects of what I'm looking at. And then along the right-hand side, I'm hopeful that you're going to see this panel along the right that describes some CSS and shows you some other values. There are more than one way to organize this. If you click on the 3-dot menu that's inside of the Web Inspector here, you can actually choose to move this Web Inspector off to the right-hand side. So let's say you have a widescreen monitor and you want to look at the code on the right and the web page on the left. That works out really nicely, especially if you're trying to maybe look at the mobile size version of the website. If you actually hover your cursor on the line that divides the web page and the Web Inspector, I believe you can actually click and drag. My computer's a little slow because I'm streaming here, but you can click and drag. Come on, you can do it, Chrome. There we go. And make the website take up less space to let you see more of the code. So you can practice moving that around with that 3-dot menu. Maybe you want it on the left. I really like it docked to the bottom. And sometimes I even prefer the option that looks like it's 2 windows exploding out from one another. That allows you to have the dev tools in its own separate window, which I think is pretty handy. if you want to just be able to browse through the code. But it is still nice to be able to see both things at once, especially for the first few activities here. So I'm going to move mine back down to the bottom. So that is way number 1 to launch the web inspector through the menus. Way number 2 is actually hinted at when you're hovering over the option in the menu here. It shows, at least on my Mac, this character that looks like a squiggle, like a diagonal squiggle with a little line next to it, and this little clover icon, and the eye. That's actually the keyboard shortcut on the Mac to open it. And that little squiggle key, if it's not on your keyboard on a Mac, is actually the Option key. And the clover icon is the Command key. So on the Mac, it's Command, Option, and then the keyboard character I to open and close the web inspector. So I'm going to hold down Option, Command I, and you'll see that as I press it, it opens and it closes. If you're on a PC, you can do that too. I think it is either Control-Shift-I or Control-Alt-I. It's one of those combinations, but that allows you to open and close it too. And that keyboard shortcut, I think, is even the same in Safari. I know that in Firefox and Edge, they're different shortcuts. But that's handy because you might want to pop it open real quick and your mouse is far away from those 3 dots. So memorizing a few keyboard shortcuts is recommended no matter what programs you're using. And I think that in a browser, one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts is Command Option I or Control Shift I. That's cool, but there is a third way. And from past experience, I think that my students prefer this. So if you wanted to look at a particular item on the page, you can actually right-click on it, or if you're on a Mac, you can control-click. If you right-click on any element on the page, whether that's a hyperlink, an image, or just text like I'm doing here, you can get to the Inspect menu. The Inspect, as you might imagine, opens up the web inspector, except it does one more thing. You're going to notice it pop up here on the bottom of my screen, but when it pops up, it actually highlights. Let me see if I can zoom this in for you. Hope you can see that. It has jumped me down. It's highlighted in blue and has selected it, the H2 current students. So you can actually tell that current students heading is an H2 just by looking at the code. And I didn't have to dive into a nest of HTML tags to try to find it. I could actually just right-click on any one of them to jump right to it. This is super powerful. You can leave that web inspector open and right-click on something else on the page, and it's going to move the web inspector here in the bottom to go look at that section of the web page. Pretty cool, right? So 3 ways to launch the web inspector. Very, very important. I want you to practice that as much as you can over the next week because you're going to use it for the rest of the semester. I want to point out a few other aspects of the web inspector. So let me hide my big face right here and go right to my browser only. So I tried to do this earlier and I think my face obscured it. Along the right hand side is this panel that we're going to use when we look at the CSS. It has several tabs in it that you can change to view what you want. The left is reserved for the code. Along the bottom you see some information about what we have selected already. And actually it looks like you cannot see the bottom because it is cropped off. So let me resize my window here. So along the bottom you can see this bar that we're going to get to in the next activity. So along the top here are these tabs. They take you to different parts of the web inspector. So we've got elements, this is where the code is. Console, this is what we're going to use at the end of the activity to do some JavaScript. Sources gives you a breakdown of everything that is being shown as part of this website. What do I mean? Well, if I open up this images folder, these are actually images that are included on the web page. If you wanted to go find one of those photos, you can actually just pop open the web inspector and you have access to it right here. You can even right click and get the URL to that image very easily. That shows everything used on the web page. So images, yes, but that even includes CSS. So if you want to look at the CSS for this website, you can actually see all those resources. You can look at the JavaScript as well. Everything's organized over here in a nice panel. The network tab shows a lot of information. Now, usually it doesn't have any data at first until you refresh the page. So it tells me to hit Command R to refresh, or I can hit this refresh button up here in the top left. And this gets populated with a lot of valuable information. Not that we're going to use in Web 1, but in Web 2, we'll probably look at this a bit more. So you can see how quickly different things on the page render, actually appear on the screen or take to download. Very helpful. Performance is that same concept even on steroids. You can actually make a recording to profile your website to see what aspects take a long time to animate or to appear on the screen. Memory is related to performance. Application lets you take a look at some of the resources related to the website that are stored on your computer. So if you actually wanted to take a look at the cookies or some of the other temporary files that get loaded up when you're on a web page, this application tab is cool. Security lets you take a look at whether this web page is trusted, whether it's secure, and that's something we'll talk about at the end of the semester. And then audits is actually a tab that I am learning to use more and more myself. We are paying attention to performance a lot more at the college, and we're also paying attention to accessibility. We're trying to make sure that screen readers and anyone that visits our website is guaranteed a fast and accessible website, whether they're using a mouse, keyboard, a screen reader, some other technology to move around a web page. The audits tab allows us to simulate and get a feel for how well our website's performing. So there's a way to run a little wizard to have it like pretend to be on a 3G or a slow connection to see what that performance is like. And if we did it on this web page, you'd see me cry because it's pretty slow right now. So that's all the aspects of my web inspector. There's a way to add plugins. So I have this WASP plugin installed that lets me take a look at some of the ad trackers that are installed on a website. But this web inspector, by default, I think you're going to see these like 7 or 8 tabs. And the one that we're going to use the absolute most today is the Elements tab. All right, so that is the end of Activity 1. You're supposed to practice launching the website or the web inspector several different ways. I'm asking everyone to pick a web page to inspect, and in order to do that, I am asking you to fill out your name and to paste in the URL to your website. So we're still dealing with URLs, just like week 1. When you paste in that URL, if you hit enter at the very end, it's going to make that clickable, which will actually make it a little bit easier to click on the link to go look at your website. So that's Activity 2. Are there any questions about launching the web inspector? I'm going to take a sip of water and wait for questions to appear in Slack or in Twitch. Oh, good. The student that was having problems hearing switched to a different browser and everything is good. That is awesome. I wonder if maybe you had to click on the image to make the audio work. I know some browsers are trying to allow you to mute different tabs. That might have been working against us tonight. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so we're going to move on. So Activity 2 is about the document object model. And we've talked about this. When we were troubleshooting HTML tags, I mentioned that the order that tags are typed is very important. And it's because it leads to that tree, that tree of this is the div that contains the paragraphs. That div is underneath the body, which is underneath the HTML tag. That's what the document object model is. And it's a really hard concept to visualize. I know that our author tries to make those little like hierarchy diagrams with the circles to show which tags are underneath which. But I find that the web inspector makes it even easier. So the web inspector actually organizes, it doesn't just color code, it organizes, all of the code that you're looking at in the web inspector underneath each tag. So this source code might actually be complete gibberish if you were to view it without the web inspector. But what the web inspector is doing is it's actually indenting, just like Adam does for us, and it's allowing me to open and close the hierarchy of tags. So it all starts with this HTML tag. That contains the head and the body tag. So I'm actually able to open these up. So let's open up the body tag. And underneath the body tag, you'll see that there's this weird no script tag. There's a div tag, some more script tags, and down at the bottom, you'll get all the way down to the closing body tag. So this exposes the DOM, the hierarchy of nodes and how they relate. It gets even more powerful when you actually choose something to inspect. So I mentioned before how if I inspect the current students heading, this actually jumps us into the code. Notice how everything is opened up. All the little disclosure triangles are open to allow me to get to that H2. If I scroll up, you'll see that I can see some of the other content above it that contains this H2. All the way up, it leads all drains lead to the body tag. So it led to the body tag. And what's really fascinating here is if I hover on something in the web inspector, you are going to see it get color coded. So you can see that there's an H2 label above the current students now, and it's colored in blue. That is actually showing me the item on the page. And if I move my mouse up higher to the parent, you'll see that instead of just highlighting the current students, it's highlighting that whole div. And it puts that little div.content label above it, because that is what contains that H2. And I can keep going up higher. I can move my mouse over this thing that has a class of tile, and that contains even more. If I hover over the section, notice how that whole part of the web page is now turned blue. That section contains all the tiles, as you can imagine from the name. This goes all the way up. If I go up high enough, I'm going to start seeing more and more of the page colored in blue. All the way to main content. At some point up here, if I scroll up to the top of the page, you'll see that I can hover over the nav bar and select that. I can hover over the logo bar, what we call the smart bar, and it highlights it on the page. So you can actually visualize the DOM, see which tags contain other tags. And let me jump back down to current students. It's really hard to follow those triangles all the way up sometimes, because you're seeing the parent of the parent of the parent, and sometimes you'll see the children and the siblings. You can actually use a shortcut here and look at the H2 in this bottom bar. Let me hide my face again here. If you look at the bottom bar, what you have selected, it shows kind of like this breadcrumb trail of all the tags that contain this H2. So this H2 is underneath a div. And if you hover over this div, you'll see it gets highlighted on the page, and I can also see what classes are on that div. It has the class content. If I hover over the div that contained that div, that now is a div that has a couple classes. It has tile, white, and intro. And actually that's this one right here. So whether I hover over it here or I hover over it up here, you'll see that it gets color coded, so you can kind of get a feel for what elements on the page are how they're being shown and what they contain. And you can follow this all the way up the chain, all the way. Can you guess what is up at the very top? That's right, the div eventually leads to the body tag, which eventually leads to the HTML tag. I think that this is pretty cool. So this is kind of showing you the ancestry of all those pages. And if you want to jump around, you can click on any one of these, and it will move what you have selected in the web inspector. So this is the DOM visualized. It is super powerful. There are a few other things I wanted to point out. You can fold and unfold those parents by clicking on the triangle. You can select those elements and they get highlighted on the page. If you're just browsing the web page and you want to jump to a specific element, you can right click and choose Inspect Elements. You can also search. So I neglected to show you this, but if you're in the web inspector here and you hit Command F or Control F, you're actually going to get this really cool search bar. So if you wanted to search for current students, you can, and it will show you every place on the page it shows up. So it's actually in 3 places. So you can jump through these. There's a link up here at the top of the web page. It says current students. And if I go to the next one, it jumps me down to the H2. You can actually search for a lot of different things. It doesn't have to just be text on the page. You could search for all the H2s or all the divs to find them on the page and jump through them. I showed you the breadcrumb trail that allows you to see from a single element on the page what all of its parents are, all the way up to the original HTML tag. And there's one other cool trick that I think still works in here. If you're not sure if this is exactly what you are looking at on the web page, I know it's colored in blue, but maybe that's still not obvious enough. I think you can hit the H key on your keyboard, and that actually adds a class, temporary class, to that element that makes it invisible. So as I do this on the page, you can actually see it disappear. So I know that I'm hiding the thing that has the right content. And you can actually have a lot of fun with this and hide a whole section of the web page if you want, just by hitting the H key on your keyboard. So that is activity number 2. For your assignment here, what I'm asking you to do is actually to take a look at the code, look at one element on the page. So, look at everything underneath the body element of the page to try to figure out what are the major regions on your web page. So if I'm inspecting this website and I try to go all the way up to the body tag, let me close the head here and close the body. If I'm opening up the body, what is underneath the body? Well, unfortunately, this web page, before I get to any content, I see this div, and if I hover over that, it highlights the whole page in blue. So all of my content is underneath one div. That's pretty interesting. Now, if I'm trying to understand how to make a web page like this, it probably doesn't help me too much to know that everything's underneath one div. That's like knowing everything's under the body tag. So I'm encouraging you to dig a bit deeper, go another level down, if you can, to try to figure out what the major regions are on the web page. So in my example, I opened up this div, and I can see that there's a nav bar up at the top. There's a logo, a div that contains the logo and the search bar. And then if I come down a bit lower, there's this other nav bar that appears inside of a div. And then there's this empty section that doesn't have any content. But then I get to this main content div. And that is what I tried to describe here. So I listed that the page's content is separated into the following main areas, elements, tags. The nav, header, nav, div for the main content, div for the footer, and a link to the top. So I want you to try to look at your web page and try to figure out how is the site organized? What are the major regions of the page? And try to find those tags. The second part of this activity is, instead of doing this breadth first, trying to get a feel for how many tags are at the top level of the page, I want you to dive deep. So I want you to find a hyperlink on your web page. And for this one, I think I went into this LLS tab and I tried to inspect the math lab link. So I actually right-clicked on that and went to inspect. So right here is the math lab link. That is pretty deep in my page. It's underneath a bunch of divs. So how do I describe where that div is on the page for this part of the activity? Remember, we went breadth first, now we're going deep. I want you to give me the ancestry. How do I get to this anchor tag that you selected on the page? And try to describe that. So you're actually going to have to type in a summary of this breadcrumb trail that leads to your hyperlink. So on my example here, I actually kind of typed it up myself with the tag names, and then I put this little greater than sign to kind of show you the flow to go from top level tag all the way down. I had to write a lot of things in here. As far as I know, there's no way to copy and paste that, so please type that in. You're probably wondering, what are these pound signs and periods? I hope from our intro to CSS, those are starting to look familiar. Anything that has this pound sign or the hashtag symbol, that represents an ID attribute. And anything that has the period represents a class. So you can actually see that if we take a look at this pound sign tiles, this is actually the section tag, the section element, and it has this ID attribute set to tiles. That means that there is no other tag on the web page that has been identified as tiles. It is unique. So I am summarizing that right here. Right here, section.tile section pound sign tiles. So I described how to find that hyperlink, and this is what I put in. So that is activity number 2. Any questions about this part of the web inspector? Any questions in the chat room? See, a lot of people have started it. That's really awesome. I usually get a lot of questions when we do this in the lab, and that's typically where this activity has been done, is in a computer lab as a group. And a lot of people get tripped up there, like why would your instructor ask you how the major content is organized? Well, it's because I have to figure that out myself if I'm going to rebuild that web page. It is oftentimes my job to go look at another website that has a really cool nav bar, let's say, or a really cool photo gallery. And if I want to rebuild that, I need to know the HTML structure. So if I can be really comfortable really quickly with just pulling up the web inspector, seeing how it's all laid out, that gets me ready to do my job even faster. And that's why I really care about that breadth first approach. So to be able to look at any website, and instead of being overwhelmed by all this code, you can start seeing, like in the Matrix, how you start seeing people in the code. Like you can start seeing, oh, that's a section over here, that's a nav bar down here. That's what I'm having you practice with, is getting a feel for the whole website without having to know thousands of tags on the page. You just need to get a feel for where everything starts to lead to the body tag. It's like watching, a river. If you look at a map that shows how rivers kind of get joined up, tributaries lead to a river. Like that's what we're trying to do with the DOM, with the web inspector, and having that breadth, that comfort with the wide range of tags is really good to know the major regions. But then oftentimes what I'm doing is like drilling straight in to look at a specific hyperlink in a nav bar to try to figure out how they built something. So going deep actually helps a lot too. So that's why the web inspector is so important to me. And I see a question now. I'm curious why the entire section is a div, but then almost all the content within it is also in divs. Oh man, you're probably going to ask yourself that question thousands of times in your life. The answer has to do a lot with CSS styles. So you have to start organizing your content. And because of the way CSS cascades down and gets inherited, sometimes you need to have different divs to stop things from propagating further. Like you wouldn't want the whole page to be this blue background, so you need to put this content inside of a div that you can write CSS for. Unfortunately, we're making layers and layers and layers and layers of elements on the web page so that we can style all of them differently. But this, I think, starts to chip away at that overwhelming iceberg that you can actually see, oh, this part of the web page, this set of tiles, this beautiful design of colors, maybe you don't like it. I don't know, I'm starting to get tired of the design myself, but if I wanted to have something like that on my website, you can see that I probably need to have some sort of tag like section or div that contains all of the tiles. And so if I wanted to make a web page like that, I'd probably start out with having a div or a section with an ID of tiles. And then underneath that, you can see that I have individual divs for each one of these little tiles. And they each have a class of tile. So the tiles thing contains a lot of the small tile elements that we've put together. Good. Someone said that answer helped. Yeah, ultimately, organizing your content into these new HTML tags, like section is a good thing, or main, or nav, those are better. If you look at some websites, you're going to see hundreds and hundreds of divs because that was the tag that we had back in like the HTML4 days. And then when they saw, I think someone did a survey when they were trying to figure out what tags to add to the HTML language, and they realized that every web page had a nav bar. So that's when we were gifted the nav tag. So let me see. I think I answered that question. When it comes to this building and so on, other than generators which build websites, are there resource sites for things ranging from borders and link colors to the style sheet, like a Lego kit for building? I like that question, that idea of a Lego kit for building with like different pieces that you can put together. There are lots of frameworks out there that will give you CSS that will let you, put together a website like Mids. In fact, we use a framework. We're going to talk about some of those in Web 2. There's a really popular one called Bootstrap, which you put their style sheet in your project, and then you just have to use certain classes to inherit the styling that you want. Let's see. There's another comment that said, seeing me go through it made it easier to understand. Yeah, this activity, like, I was overwhelmed with the Web Inspector. I think I spent the first 2 or 3 years of using the Web Inspector just using a couple pieces of it. Oh, I realize my screen isn't up right now. I'm sorry, everyone. So I started using the Web Inspector for the first couple years, and I never went past the Elements tab. And I don't think I even knew that. Let me put browser only up. I don't think I even knew how to use this right-hand section. And my goal with this exercise is really to give you a comfort level with like 3 or 4 major pieces of the Web Inspector that you will use on a regular basis. So let's see. W3 School. Oh, someone shared a link to W3 Schools. Yeah, there's a lot of sites and resources like the W3 Schools that will actually show you some code. And then if you scroll down on the page, they'll show you an example of it being used, and you can actually retype in and change it. And if you stick with me in the Web Inspector, you can actually use the Web Inspector to do things like that too. So let's move on to activity 3. I showed you how to view this web page through the lens of the Web Inspector, and that allowed us to look at the code. But the Web Inspector is more than just looking at it. It lets you edit it. So let me show you something that's absolutely kind of crazy to think about. Let's try to edit this web page. I can actually double click. If I open up this a bit deep enough, I can double click on the words current students, and maybe I get a message that says, it's not just for current students, it's also for alumni. I can type that in, and look at that. We have a tile that says it's for current students and alumni. I should go do that on the web page, right? No, it looks terrible. So I can actually use the Web Inspector to mock up what different changes will do to the web page. And this is where I usually have a person kind of get freaked out, because not only can you edit, you can delete. Maybe I don't like this this other colorful let's see, this dark gray. Let's say I don't like class cancellations. What is this web page going to look like if I delete that section of the content? I can delete it right here. Is anyone freaked out that I just broke the Mid-Michigan College website? Well, luckily for all of us, I did not break the college website. It still has all that content there. In fact, if I refresh the page, those tiles that I deleted and the current students wording that I had changed to say alumni, it all came back. And that's because as you are browsing the web, think about how the browser works. It sends a request to the server, and the server sends back the HTML and the CSS and the image, and it assembles it, and it shows it to you on your web page. Your computer, your browser, is actually showing you a copy of the website. So all the web inspector is allowing you to do is fiddle with, change, add, delete to that copy of the website. So that means that you can do ridiculous things like edit text, delete content, and everything is going to be all right. So I want you to practice with this. And this is where I have to tell you that with great power comes great responsibility. You could, and I am not telling you this, you could break up relationships with this tool by editing what a Facebook web page shows. Do not do anything like that. I want you to have fun though and tweak different websites. I did this activity so many times in a computer lab, and I'd done it in another instructor's class, and as I walked around to see what students were doing to the web page, he had somehow figured out how to insert my image into every one of these tiles. So it was like a Celebrity Squares edition of my face in every single tile on this web page. You can do some fun things. You can play some pranks. I hope that you use this for good, for understanding how tags work. If you want to actually type in new tags, it does require a little bit of work. I showed you how I can double click on anything to edit the text. That doesn't let you type in tags by default. Like I think if I try to put in a line break in here and I hit enter, you'll see that what actually shows up is the less than and greater than symbol. It actually thinks that I want to escape that out into those HTML entities. So you're not able to type in code there by just double clicking. You actually have to right click, and instead of editing as text, you have to edit as HTML. So maybe I wanted to say it's for current students and alumni on a different line. So I can type that in after I choose edit as HTML and then click away. And now current students and alumni, it still doesn't fit very well. I think I really broke this design with that. So maybe I would have to change that a little bit before I actually go edit it for real. So it looks like I got a couple questions in here. Thank goodness it's not that easy to break an external website. I agree. Though some of the websites I've looked at could benefit from that kind of easy edit. Yep. If a site has a style sheet imported to it, are you able to change how something is styled? Or would you have to embed your style sheet because it's cascading? And can you see what their style sheet looks like if it is an external link thing? The answer to all of those questions really is you can do all of the CSS things, and we'll do that in an upcoming part of this activity. So I'm going to pause your question there, and we'll get to it in just a little bit. But yeah, go crazy in this part and do something. Like I removed the empty tiles, I changed the heading, I added a brand new link. I added a new link inside of one of those tiles to see what would happen. Honestly, I do this on the Mid website a lot. I'm in meetings where people will ask, can we change this letter? Can we change these letters? Can we change this sentence? Can we add this image? And I can do a lot of that just in the web inspector to see what it will look like. And this is actually a good way to learn about another site. You might like someone's nav bar, but what if you actually had like the name of your business, or you had your links inside of that nav bar? What would happen? Would it work? And so this allows you to mock that up. So for this activity, I am asking you to try editing, deleting, and adding within the DOM. Activity 4, we are going to switch to CSS. So I'm going to pause here, get a drink of water, and we will look at CSS in just a second. There's one more question. Let's see. Can you put images in nav bars and sliders instead of, say, gray bars and such? Yes, you can put images in nav bars. We have a fancy little drop-down menu here where we have images that show up. In fact, if you wanted to inspect that image, you could take a look. What's cool about Chrome's web inspector is if you hover over the path to an image, you can actually see the original image. So you'll see that that picture of the bookstore is kind of square, but if you look closely, we've done something to make it a circle. And as you're going to see in a little bit, it has to do with the CSS that we've added to that image through these classes. We have this class called image-circle, which does something really cool to it. But yeah, if you wanted to add that image, it's in a nav bar, I promise you. Oh, maybe it's not in an actual nav bar with the word nav, but we have, oh no, it is. Right here is this nav with an ID of main nav. Now it takes a few more organizing HTML elements for us to get everything to be so that you could hover on it and have the menu appear underneath it. We had to group our links. There's actually separate divs for each one of these menus, and then that appears. In order to add the image, we use that image tag like you were proposing and put a special class on it. Okay, I think that answers that question. So let's look at some CSS. It seems like that's where we want to go right now. Let me refresh the page to set it back to the original. And let me make sure that I know what I need to show here. Okay, so I am going to find this blue tile, this bright blue tile called Advising and Mentoring. You'll see that I actually had selected the H2. So the actual title, Advising and Mentoring, is a hyperlink. It's this A tag that is contained inside of an H2, which is contained inside of a div with a class of content, which is inside of a div with class of tile. That's what I thought I was selecting that first try. But that's what I want to look at right now. Along the right-hand side, and this is where I have to say goodbye to my face for a minute here so you can just see Web Inspector. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Remember, we're looking at this bright blue tile here. As I hover over it, it turns even a slightly different color of blue, because that's the one that I'm looking at. Over here on the right-hand side, I hope you all see this panel that has a couple tabs in it. We're looking at the style panel inside of this section over here. This lets you see all of the CSS that is affecting this div right here. So that includes a lot of different things. It includes this CSS that I actually wrote several years ago. This was the selector. It was very complicated. It tried to select just the thing with a, oops, I lost it. I clicked. It tried to select just the thing that had a class of tile, and it applied a bunch of CSS properties like a width, a color. If I scroll down a little bit further, it shows me some other CSS rules, including this one that has to do with cyan, and that's what actually sets the color to that blue. So this panel lets you see all of the CSS at play, rule by rule. If I keep going further down, you'll see that more and more things are crossed out. Can anyone in the chat room guess why some of these styles are crossed out? I can keep going all the way down, all the way down to where it actually shows styles that were inherited from the browser itself. So if I get all the way down to the bottom here, these are styles that came from other style sheets in the web page and even from the browser itself. So someone answered revisions over time. Good guess. And it might be because of revisions over time. But someone said outdated, or we were trying to stop it by overwriting. And then another person said they aren't used. You're right. They're crossed out because they did not win out. So there's that concept of a cascade in CSS. That's what the C stands for, where you can write rules that collide with each other. And the browser has to figure out which one wins. And there's a couple criteria for that, including specificity and the importance and where the rule comes from. If it came from style tags or an external style sheet or an inline style, all those add up to different points to allow one style to win. You can't be both blue and black at the same time, right? Like one of those styles is going to win. And I think in last week's webcast, we played that game of blue team or red team or something like that, and we wrote a couple styles, and what we found is the last rule won out. Well, in that case, when a couple different rules are at play, and you want to know what's actually happening in the browser, you can open up the web inspector and see the properties that are winning. They're the ones that are not crossed out. And you can see, oh, look, that thing that I thought was going to make it a certain color is crossed out. Clearly, there's another rule somewhere else that is overriding it. And just knowing that is really helpful. However, you can actually find out where exactly this rule is coming from. So right here, we had this rule that was supposed to set the margin on the bottom to 40 pixels, but it's crossed out. So it's not actually happening. So if I want to see what file that came from, I can actually hover over this word above it. It shows that this came from the mmcc.css file, and it actually shows me the line. That last number is 1,699. I believe that there are that many lines of CSS on the web page, on that CSS style sheet for this site, and that one's being overridden. If I hover over here, you'll see that the one that won out was on line 1,759. So you can actually see exactly where in the style sheet the rules are coming from. And I think what I did earlier is I just clicked on this. It will actually take you to the sources tab and show you the raw CSS file that you could copy and paste from to your own atom. And it shows you that rule. So if you wanted to grab it, you could. And that's really powerful. But I haven't shown you the coolest. You know how you can view HTML? You can actually edit CSS as well. So the first thing that I wanted you to do was in activity 4, I wanted you to look at some CSS. So I picked the math lab link, and I wanted you to describe what styles are affecting the link that you've been inspecting and where do they come from. So if I go into this LLS and I right click on the math lab link and I inspect it, I wrote that the styles came from this mmcc.css style sheet that set it to be underlined, that changed the color to white. And I can see if I scroll down far enough, there's some other styles that come in from not the mmcc.css file. This one comes in from a different CSS file called Bootstrap. That was the framework that I mentioned that a student asked about. So you can see that there are a lot of different rules and a lot of different CSS files that are all vying for domination in the cascade to see actually what that element's going to look like. And if they're crossed out, that means that they were overridden and they aren't taking effect. And this is really powerful, but sometimes you just want to know what font is that, what color is that. And so if you don't want to have to trace down through this long list of all the styles, you can actually click on the computed tab, and this will show you the final values. Let me make this a little bit wider. So you can actually see that, let me pick that, instead of the link, I'm going to pick that blue tile again. If I am on this tile, you can see that the background color is #009EEF, or the font is Source Sans Pro. It shows me all this information, the final values, which is really, really cool. These are all the values that we tweaked for this one tile, and you can see the ultimate values right here. At the top of that section, in the computer section, it actually shows you this little box model, which we're going to be talking about more in a future week, that will show you how wide and tall something is, and as well as like what borders and padding have been applied. So that is looking at CSS. So that in that activity, you have to describe what styles were affecting the hyperlink that you were looking at. Any questions there? It looks like it gets pretty convoluted over time. If you look at the bottom of that styles tab, are you seeing the final values or the most recent values? How is that list determined? So let me clarify that. It is my understanding, and this might vary from browser to browser, but I think Chrome in particular is showing the most relevant specific rules up at the top. So this was a very specific selector that I wrote. It involved a descendant selector. I selected the section, and then I selected the tiles underneath it. That one appears up at the top. The rules that are at the very bottom of this list in the cascade, these are rules that come from that are less specific, that come from other files or come from the browser itself. I know when I look at this in Safari, I will actually see like the default font that Safari wants to use, and it has a line through it because it's just not relevant. But on top are the most specific rules that affect what you're looking at. It's not necessarily the most recent, it's the ones that are most likely to be affecting what you are looking at. So that top one definitely shows relevant styles, and even like the next couple, this is where that background color one came from. Obviously that one's not overridden because it doesn't have a line through it. Oh, you can't see what I'm pointing at. I am sorry, guys. I keep doing that. So browser only. So at the top of this list, scroll back up. At the top of this list, these are the most specific ones. And I was showing you that I had to scroll down at least through a couple of them to see where the background color came from. But if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, these become more and more generic and less specific. In Safari, I know that if I browse down all the way to the bottom, it shows me those default styles that come with Safari. Will the sheet and style block be different things for different browsers? I think I can answer that. This panel over here, the styles area, isn't visible by default in Safari. There's a button to make it appear. I think it's there in Chrome by default. And for browsers with custom themes, what does that do for the CSS? Oh, that's a good question. So if you install a plugin that tries to like block ads, sometimes what that is doing is actually installing additional styles or different additional code that is going to affect what's over here on the right. And I think we talked about how every browser allows you to set like a base font size for accessibility reasons, so you don't want any text smaller than like 15 point. That when you actually use that feature of the browser, it's throwing that in as a style that gets overridden like even the site styles. So that concept of the cascade is really powerful. It looks like we have a follow-up question that it seems odd because I would imagine since the rule is set for cascading, that would show you the logic that the browser goes through to show you the final result. Well, you can jump right to the final result. That's what that computed is for. And this shows you every property. The problem is that there can be a lot of rules that win out. Like it might be the width from this rule that wins. Notice how this rule that as it was written in the CSS, if I actually click this link, this rule covered a lot of different values. Oops, I just scrolled too far. It set the width, the margin, the color, but it had nothing to do with the background color. So in order for me to get a full picture of that, I actually have to scroll down to look at some of the other rules that are in contention too. So this less specific rule is the one that had mentioned background color last. So I know that seems a little counterintuitive, but you could have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different CSS declarations, styles that you've written that all vie for attention, and maybe they're not all setting the same properties. Like some of them could be related to fonts, some of them could be related to colors, and you would want to see all of those, but they wouldn't be condensed down into just one rule, not necessarily. Does that help? I'm not sure who Ghostwriter is, but I hope that answer clarifies it a little bit. So let's get to the really fun thing. After you've learned to describe what CSS and find what CSS is happening, you can edit it too, guys. So I am going to show you lots of things that you can do, starting with editing this color. So Chrome, if I'm on any CSS property that lets me look at a color, I can actually click in here on the little color square, and I can pick a different color. Now, in reality, let me click away from this. This class was named Cyan. I don't think that should be a bright pink, but I can pretend to edit that and see what will happen. So you can edit colors. You can change. You notice how your cursor appears in here. You can type in values if you know a different color. You can type in names of properties. My favorite thing, though, is that there are these little check boxes. So if I wanted to get rid of this rule that tries to set the width, I can uncheck that, and now we don't set the width on any of our tiles, and look how our page breaks. Or maybe I don't want to set the height. So what would it look like if the height wasn't set? Well, it becomes this little like checkerboard of different height tiles, which is kind of interesting. Notice how it crosses it out because it's no longer being used. If I wanted to get rid of, or if I wanted to actually see what it would look like if we had a bigger margin, because sometimes I confuse margin for padding. Let me change 4 to 40. And this is actually one of the things that I love doing most as I'm trying to understand what CSS does, is I will use the web inspector to open up my file, and then I can just type in, and it doesn't even matter what I'm playing with because it doesn't get saved. And I can see what that web page will look like with really extreme values. So what would it look like if I set each tile to be 500 pixels? That's really too big, so maybe I'll do 275. And that, you know what, that kind of works. It restacks kind of nicely here. So I can play speculatively with all of these CSS rules to change them. You can even add style. So if you wanted to change this div right here, there's a section that Chrome leaves open for you called element.style. You could write new styles in here, like let's do background color. And I think you can tab to autocomplete. And then we could put, it auto-completes the classes that it's aware of. So I can maybe use red, or what the color values it's aware of. And now I've changed that. Notice how it didn't change my background color down here. It left that as the bright pink. It just crossed it out. I now have written an inline style. Over here, reflected in the code, it added the style attribute and it added the background color red. So this first section here isn't even an existing CSS rule. It's like a brand new inline style that you can add. You can also add brand new rules by clicking this plus button. And then you could write the selector, or it kind of auto-completes the selector for whatever you had selected. And you can write a brand new rule that was never on the style sheet to begin with that changes the background color. And here you can see I tried to make it blue, but it didn't win out. So maybe I could uncheck the red, and now that new style for blue should appear down here as well. So there's a question that I'll answer in a little bit, but I want you to play around with these values, adding properties, changing their values to something extreme. You can do some crazy cool things. This is how I discover new CSS properties, is I go find a web page that is demonstrating it, and I look under the covers and I can tweak it. If I go to a web page all about you know, a certain color, like if I wanted to play around with transparency, I can actually look on their web page, see their current value, and then change it to something really transparent or really opaque, just to see how it works. So the web inspector is extremely powerful for CSS as well. Let me bring my video back up here. So what do I ask you to do? I ask you to just edit some CSS rules. So you can consider changing font sizes, spacing, like padding and margin, positioning, colors, anything, and then describe what you did in this activity. I'm going to take one more quick break and answer some questions before we do the JavaScript lesson. Let's see. Is that why some plugins like AdBlock or HTTPS Anywhere force a secure connection after alter the way a page displays? Does it override the website or just force it to ignore something, since spaces where ads are at can still be there but displayed blank? Yeah, I think you are onto something there. I don't know how every ad blocking plugin works, but I know that some of the early ones that were implemented were through CSS and JavaScript. So what you're going to see, especially in this next lesson about JavaScript, is kind of how some of those plugins work. They'll know that most of the ad networks out there have a div that has a certain ID or includes a certain URL, and it will delete that content or just not load it or make it white or something like that. So that's definitely part of how ad blockers work. But I think these days they're even more sophisticated than that. So I can't speak for everything out there, but you're onto something with how that's implemented. Yes, we're almost to JavaScript already. So before we get to the JavaScript, let's recap what we've done. We have popped open the web inspector a dozen times already. We have become really familiar with looking at major regions of the web page to figure out how a site is structured. We have inspected a specific link on a page, which took us really deep into the DOM of a web page. We were then able to make edits to it, the HTML tag. We could add new content. We could copy that content into Atom if we wanted to after we're done playing with it. At any point in time, if we don't like our edits, we refresh and we go back to the way the page was meant to be displayed. If we were inspecting something, we can look at the CSS that's affecting it, and we can go one step further and tweak that CSS. So if you find a nav bar out there that you love, you can copy the HTML, you can copy the CSS, and before you do any of that, you can tweak it to be your nav bar before you paste it into your site in Atom. I can't tell you enough how many times I use this in a day on my own website and on others. So it is really powerful. And I want to top that with a little bit of JavaScript. I promised you that we would get to this point early in the semester, and we're not even halfway through the semester, and we're talking about JavaScript today. Now, I'm not going to have you memorize how to actually write JavaScript, but I'm going to give you a couple sample commands that I want you to type in today. And it is JavaScript that interacts with the DOM. So now that you understand that tags are nested within tags and they form that relationship between parent and child, I want to tell you that JavaScript is a programming language that lets you do things to the DOM. So after the web page loads, you can run code that looks at the DOM or changes the DOM. And what I want to do first here is show you where that JavaScript can be written. So let me open up the web inspector, and I want to take you to the console. That's the second tab in the web inspector. You'll see that what appears is this blinking cursor. There's this little caret and a blinking cursor. This is where we can type in whatever JavaScript code we want. And the first code that I want you to write is probably something that you've seen on the web, a little alert box. So you can start typing alert. And this is a function, so we need to send it something to do. So the way that you write a function in JavaScript is you have the name of it, and then you pass inside of two parentheses that kind of surround the message that you're sending it. We're going to pass it a message that we want it to display. And because a message is words or a string, we have to surround it in quotation marks, just like you have in HTML in the attributes area. So I am going to send what every programmer sends as their first message when they're building a program. We are going to send a simple hello message, hello world. This is what that command looks like. And although I have this code written in the activity, you can't copy and paste it. I tweaked the characters so that they would give you errors if you did try to copy and paste it. I actually want you to try typing this into the console yourself. And when you do that, you will get one of those annoying pop-up boxes that says hello world. If I click OK, you'll see that the word undefined appeared, and actually my cursor's blinking again. So it's ready for another command. What you're looking at inside of the web inspector, this console, is a REPL. REPL stands for read, evaluate, print, loop. So read. As you type this command in, as you hit enter, your browser is going to read the command. It is going to evaluate it. It is going to figure out what to do with that code. When it evaluates it, it's going to print it out. So it actually prints out the result of the message, and then it is going to loop. Now, this alert, hello world, returned nothing, so it said undefined, but it did loop. It's ready for more. So let's do something a bit more normal. Let's type 1 + 1. If you hit enter, you'll see that it returned 2. So in context here, I think the read, evaluate, print, loop makes a bit more sense. It's reading the commands 1 + 1. You know how to do that. Your computer does too. It's going to say 2. It's going to print out the value that was returned, and it is going to loop, ready for you to do more. REPLs make really nice learning environments for learning code, and the REPL for JavaScript that you're probably going to use the most is built into the web inspector right here. All right, so you have now used the REPL. You can write basic JavaScript commands, and the next one that I want us to try running after we try this hello world one is to actually write some code that tries to use the DOM. We're going to ask a question of the DOM. We're going to ask how many links to anchor tags are there on a web page. And there are a bunch on this web page. Let me give you a little heads up here. So we're going to work with the DOM, which is available through the document object. So we're going to take document, that is the document object model, and then I'm going to call a method on it. I'm going to do that by adding a period. And like Atom, the web inspector auto-completes. So as you start typing this, it should allow you to tab through it. We're going to select what did I do wrong here? What am I looking for? I'm sorry, not select. We're going to get element, and you can see it narrows it down by tag name. So what tag name are we going to look for? Well, we have to send it a little bit of information. We're going to send it another string. And this is actually going to represent the tag that we're looking for. So I am going to put A in here. So this message that I've formulated, I am asking the document object model to get all of the elements with a tag name of A. That is the hyperlink tag that we have grown to love. And if I hit enter, you'll see that it returns this collection. And it's actually a list of all of the links on the page and their classes and everything else. There's this little disclosure triangle. If you click on it, it will open it up. And you'll see that it actually has grouped them into groups of 100. So we ran this selector, this JavaScript code that runs a selector that gets all of the tags that have the name of, or the tag name of A. Now, I was hoping it would tell us how many there were, but all it did was list them out. And oh no, actually it did. Right here it has the number 168. If you wanted to just get the number, you can actually hit the up arrow, and if you add another period, you can actually call one more function. You could actually call length, and that you'll get the size of how many there were. So I am running the same code by hitting the up arrow and adding .length to the end, and you'll see that it returns 168. You could have also inferred that just by reading up here in this message that it returned 168 items in a collection. So there are that many links on the page. For the next thing, I want you to actually figure out how many div tags are on your web page and see how many there are. You can probably hit the up arrow to alter that, or you could type it all again, but you would be replacing the A with a div, and you can see that my web page has many, many more. Does your site have more than mine? Hopefully I will award a winner. Whoever has the most divs and links on a page wins. Alright, so we have used the web inspector. We have just scratched the surface. There are many more tabs in that tool. There are many more ways to use the web inspector, and I promise you if you take Web 2, we will have even more practice with that, especially in Firefox. Let me check the chat room to see if there are any more questions. Someone asked how logins work. Is that anything that we'll learn about with Java? Well, so logins typically require you to have some sort of server-side component because someone needs to tell you if that password and username are valid. So we aren't going to work with them in Web 1. In Web 2, we're going to look at setting up a content management system that has permissions as part of it. So we'll use WordPress, and we'll look at a few others that let you have a list of users and passwords. And I think that's something that we'll explore is logins that way. Someone was writing their own Hello World program in BASIC. That's awesome. In the chat room, I don't see any other questions. I want to keep this a little bit closer to an hour if we can. Just to recap, the web inspector is like my favorite tool. We've learned how to look at any web page. You can now piece it apart. You can find CSS. You can use this tool to look for new CSS properties. You can edit your web page with the web inspector to mock something up. You can edit other people's websites for fun and for learning. And you can even practice JavaScript in it as well. Welcome to the web inspector. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. There is one other challenge where I ask you to basically do all of this again, to edit a web page and take a screenshot, or to make a screen recording describing what you've done to change the web page. It's a lot of fun. Are there any other questions? Oh, there is a very important question. How do you submit your work? You just type it in this document. Everyone needs to have their own line in the document. Hit tab if you need a new row in the table created, and summarize what I asked you to do. Like I wrote how many anchor tags and div tags I had, and that's all you have to do. There should not be any need to submit anything in Moodle for that. I will look at this document and update your grade. I can't seem to get in the table or have it populate around my answer. So if you click inside of the last person's row at the very end, and you hit tab, it should add a new row. If that's not working, please send me a message in Slack and we'll figure it out. All right. Thank you for watching this recording. If you're joining us later, if you are in the Twitch chat room or you're watching live, thank you for watching it. The web inspector is my favorite tool, and I'm glad that we got to talk about it today. I will see you all again soon.